Greetings, my fellow freedom lovers and sovereign thinkers. This is LL3's latest podcast. My name is Craig, and I'm presiding along the beautiful swampy mangroves of South Florida. Today is March 11th, 2014. Yeah, early morning, but I said, what the hell? Yeah, I'm going to be discussing a few topics at the most, maybe four. See if I can wing it tonight. And first, I'm going to be narrating an article that was done by Congressman Ron Paul from Texas Straight Talk, and it was transcribed by Infowars.com, which it was done yesterday to be exact, and it's entitled, "Can We Afford Ukraine?" And let's do it. Officially, U.S. debt stands at more than $17 trillion. In reality, it is many times more. The cost of the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq may be more than $6 trillion. President Obama's illegal invasion of Libya cost at least $1 billion and left that country devastated. The cost of U.S. regime change efforts in Syria are likely thus far enormous, both in dollars and lives. That's still a secret. So, hold on here. So, who's in the right mind where you think at least in the good time to start a war with Russia over Ukraine, and worse, who will commit the United States to bail out Ukraine that will need at least $35 billion to survive the year? Who? The President and Congress, backed by neocons, the so-called humanitarian interventionists? The vote overwhelmingly last week to provide $1 billion in loan guarantees to Ukraine. This is just the beginning. You could be sure. But let's be clear, this is not money for the population of that impoverished country. The administration is sending $1 billion from taxpayers to wealthy international bankers who hold Ukrainian debt. It is an international bank bailout not to aid Ukrainians, and despite the escalating anti-Russia rhetoric, ironically, some money will likely go to Russia for Ukraine's $2 billion unpaid gas bill. So what happened in Ukraine? The U.S. government and media claim that the U.S. must save Ukrainian democracy from invading Russian army that is threatening the country's sovereignty, but in reality the crisis was instigated in part by U.S. meddling. Remember the intercepted telephone call in which two senior Obama administration officials discussed plans to replace the elected government in Ukraine with U.S. puppets. This is exactly what happened. Is that a violation of Ukrainian sovereignty? Is that what democracy is all about? Obama administration's policy toward Ukraine is hypocritical. Overthrow the government of Kyiv by violent street protests was called a triumph of democracy, but when the elected parliament in autonomous Crimea voted last week to hold a referendum to decide its future, President Obama condemns it as a violation of international law. What about the principle of self-determination, which is also enshrined in international law? I have long thought that a referendum to reorganize Ukraine into a looser confederation of regions might help reduce tensions. I still believe this could help. But it seems the U.S. government is not so enthusiastic about democracy when there is a chance for an outcome it opposes. I strongly believe that Crimeans have right to transfer sovereignty over to Melissa to Russia if they wish. The only question that remains is whether there will be an honest election, and I don't see any reason they can't be. U.S. government tells the world, we want you to be good Democrats and have elections, but they don't elect the right people. Then we complain about it and throw them out, like we did in Egypt. In Crimea, they want to have an election to determine their future. President Obama condemned those plans for vote by saying, we are well beyond the days when borders can be redrawn over the heads of Democratic leaders. Does he not remember that the authorities in Kyiv were installed just weeks ago after the U.S.-backed coup against the Ukrainian constitution? Congress next week will likely vote for sanctions against Russia, though many mistakenly I believe that sanctions are a relatively harmless way of forcing foreign countries to do what we say. We should be clear. Sanctions are an act of war. Cooler heads in the United States are not currently prevailing. There is a danger of an unimaginable conflict between the U.S. and Russia. We must demand a shift away from war, pulling away from incendiary rhetoric. We are broke, can't afford to buy Ukraine. We certainly can't afford another war, especially with Russia. All I have to say about this, Congressman Paul, is absolutely correct. Like I always address in past episodes pertaining to the subject on Ukraine, Kio Bono, who benefits. Truth of the matter is, the Obama administration need to shut their mouths up or get the hell out. Because as far as I'm concerned, they're just examples of past administrations. They want to contaminate space. And who's going to pay the bill? We do. We pay for it. Conscriptedly. Involuntary servitude. What are we convicted of? Making a living? And these bastards in Congress, I believe Marco Rubio wants sanctions, clam boy that he is. You know what? You go there and fight. You pathetic Mr. Clean Chicken Hawk and all your cohorts, regardless of partisanship. Calling all you bastards out and bimbos in those elected positions because you don't know diddly squat. Go to your U.S. Constitution, read the Federalist Papers and Anti-Federalist Papers, then we'll come and talk. Deep down inside you know I'm right. Well, that's how I have to say about the whole thing with the United States entangling with Ukraine. Let them take care of themselves. The grand chessboard is a joke. If Brzezinski don't like it, have him go out there and fight. For all I care. And all you lackeys do the same. Alright, let's hit the next topic. This is from the Liberty Crier. You go to libertycrier.com and it is entitled Equal Rights versus Special Privileges. It was published today, at the exact March 11, 2014, and it was written by a freelance writer from Dallas, Texas named Nelson Holtberg, which he's the director for Americans for a Free Republic. And you go to afr.org. Everything's all there. And I haven't really read it yet, but I shall. And let's begin here. One of the major evils of the welfare state in libertarians' eyes is that it destroys the concept of objective law, an example, equal rights under the law, throughout society. This is because the welfare state is based upon a violation of individual rights in order to convey privileges to special interest groups. All primary policies of state welfarism entail such a violation of conveyance. This is why justice can never be achieved under the welfare state philosophy, liberal or conservative. Government jobs is to protect rights, not violate them. It must be applied equally, which means no privileges. Yet we are taught today that American conveyance of privileges to special interest groups that will bring us a just society. It is even taught that our concern with special interest groups is the American way. This in faith or fact that the founders repeatedly warned against the creation of political faction. Special privileges defined. What follows will hopefully throw some light of this important issue and clarify how government conveyance of special privileges is destroying freedom and justice. Because of heavy ideological obfuscations that prevails in our media and our schools, we need to first define the term special privilege. It means the intervention of government into free market to legislate policy that favors specific individuals and groups over their individual or groups. It is an enactment of law that is either aid or suppress some people in relation to other people. Special privilege can take a number of forms. For an example, 1. When government grants subsidize to corporations, banks, farmers, and low-income earners, it is conveying a special privilege to these recipients at the expense of individuals whose earnings are confiscated in order to pay for subsidies. Their right to disposal of their income, an example, their property, is violated. 2. When government dictates that certain quotas of racial sexual groups must be enrolled in college and hired in businesses because of race or gender rather than the free determination of merit. It is conveying a special privilege to those who are enrolled and hired at the expense of those who are better qualified but are not enrolled and hired because of quotas. Their right to free determination of merit is violated. 3. When government allowing striking labor unions to physically prohibit non-union workers from replacing them by means of violence or through NLB mandates, it is granting special privilege of monopoly power to union workers at the expense of all non-union workers in the marketplace. Their right to freely seek employment is violated. 4. When government passes a law mandating that oil prices cannot be raised by beyond a certain level, it is conveying a special privilege to the consumers of oil at the expense of the producers of oil. Their right of freedom of trade is violated. Therefore, whenever a government intervenes into a marketplace to aid or suppress specific individuals and groups at the expense of others, it is conveying special privileges and violating rights, which cannot make for a just society. This doesn't mean government intervention itself is wrong. Government must intervene into the marketplace to protect men's rights by curbing violence and fraud. Most thinkers would add a second legitimate intervention, which should provide those few services we cannot handle in the marketplace as communicable: disease control, emergency 911 service, city streets, etc. But this kind of government intervention is a provision of services for all men in general, instead of enactment of specific policies for some at the expense of others. Government intervention is thus necessary to maintain freedom and order in society, but only if it is objective in nature and used to protect rights or to provide minimal services that cannot be provided in a free market. Once government intervention is used to convey special privileges, it becomes arbitrary in nature, and the authorities that legislate such intervention always become dictatorial. Excuse me. This then is the major reason why libertarian and conservative advocates of freedom vehemently oppose the welfare state. It makes government a conveyor of privileges instead of protector of rights, which turns government into a criminal agency. Criminality being defined as a violation of individual rights. It destroys the concept of equal rights, which is the foundation, the stone upon which freedom, order, and justice are based. Equal rights under the law is the most important principle in America's political system, but there can be no equal rights if government enacts unequal tax rates, an example, progressive rates, or if it mandates that some corporations have the right to set their prices freely, but not other corporations, or it follows free association to racial minorities, but not racial majorities. Redundancy and reciprocity. Yeah, that's how you pronounce it. To further clarify this crucial issue, consider the following truism. There is no such thing in reality as simply rights. Rights by very nature must also be equal, or they are not rights. The phrase equal rights is really a redundancy. For instance, we all have an equal right to freedom of speech, or we no longer talking about a right. If all men do not have the same right to speak freely, then the right to free speech does not exist. In other words, rights necessitate the concept of reciprocity. Whenever I have a right to, everyone else must also have the right to. All rights are thus reciprocal, or they are not rights but privileges. So whenever we talk about rights, we are automatically talking about equal rights. There cannot be no such thing as an equal right or a right just for some citizens. rights are equal for all, or are they